Hey everybody! Today I'm here on a grey afternoon in Mexico City to talk about inequality with Ricardo Fuentes Nieva. Ricardo is the Director of Oxfam Mexico. He's a specialist in inequality, and let's see what he has to say about the most important aspects that inequality holds these days. Ricardo,
Tell me, Alice.
You wrote a report together with your colleague Nick Galasso a couple of years ago that was very influential on the subject of inequality. Could you tell me something about the statistic that became really famous and how you came about to invent that?
Well, yeah, I mean, using a database that a Swiss bank was producing, Credit Suisse, I could just calculate that the 85 richest people in the world control as much wealth as the bottom half of the population. And as you said, I mean, that kind of statistic, we published that report in January 2014. And it was at a moment when inequality was coming into the public conversation, but it was not as sexy a topic as it is now. And I guess what that paper with that specific statistic helped put in the global conversation was the fact that not only wealth is extremely concentrated, but that it reflects and it reproduces political and economic systems that are very unfair. And I think over the past 5 years, ever since we published that paper, our understanding has evolved quite a lot on what are the mechanisms that reproduce this or protect or enhance these unfair systems, be it campaign finance, being monopolistic structures in industries, being tax havens and tax evasion, tax solution, or just being basic corruption that goes unpunished. And it's happening in many places around the world, and then we start seeing now the consequences of those unfair systems.
Why do you think that it's now that there's so much new research about these topics and so many new findings?
Well, I think there are two main reasons. One is we have more and better data. I think all the work that has been done on collecting information using tax sources, on what's the share of income going to the top 1% by Piketty, Hayes, and Atkinson. It gave us a new insight of what was going on, not the whole distribution of income, but what was going on the top end of the distribution. I think that was very important. And I think also the financial crisis in 2008 and the social movements, the subsequent social movements like Occupy Wall Street, kind of gave us something to think about, because we started asking the question, how is it if we're producing all this wealth through the globalization process over the past 35 years, how is it that then many people feel left out? And I think the new research on inequality tries to provide an insight of why is that happening, why are people feeling that way, and what can be done to change that.
What can be done to change that from, say, Oxfam's part? What is your role in the process?
Well, that's a very good question. I think we need. It's a system. That's one thing that we've learned in Oxfam. It's not. When we look at inequality, we start looking at economic inequality, but that's just one face of the different inequalities that we worry about. Because that economic inequality is reproduced by ethnic inequality, by gender inequality. It's multiplied by the interaction between different sources of inequality. And at the end, it's coming from a system that's benefiting certain privileged groups over groups that have been marginalized, discriminated, and left behind historically and in the present. So the solution needs to be systemic, and that's kind of like the general answer. But people might ask, what does that mean? What does it mean to have a systemic response? And having a systemic response means like having looking at the political structures, looking at the economic structures, and looking at the societal structures, and looking more than anything, looking at how power in its formal ways and in the informal ways is distributed in society, and how that power is being used for the benefit of the few or for the benefit of the whole society.
Do you think there is an aspect of inequality that is under-researched, or what do you think needs to be looked at more specifically?
I think, and we've been discussing, you and I, Alice, this. I think that gap of trust between people who make decisions, either in politics or the private sector, and the rest of the population is growing, and it's very worrying, because what basically that means is that people are not trusting decision makers, or they're not trusting the system, and that they might be right, for the reasons that I just described. But if we don't rebuild the systems in a way that people believe that the decisions are being made soundly, that they're being made for the benefit of everyone, what we're going to have is a social disruption. And again, we start to see that in many places around the world. And I think that gap between the kind of the trust between decision makers and the general public is something that we are not understanding quite well. It's an issue of why one as a citizen kind of devolves some of our liberties and power to the state if we don't believe the state is actually making the right decisions for us. And I think these are very deep questions about the social contract. These are very deep questions about the role of the state, the role of citizens, and the interaction between the state and citizens, and how that contract can be renewed, strengthened, and be accountable.
What would your ideal society look like if you could change these things?
Well, I mean, it's a society where we have a strong and accountable state, where there is a strong rule of law, so that like whether you have money or not, whether you have power or not, doesn't determine whether the law applies to you, and more importantly, a society where people organize themselves to contribute, to demand, and to protect that social contract that's very important. So we need those three elements. And Fukuyama has written about this, that we need the element of a strong state, but accountable, the elements of the rule of law, so that no one is above the law, especially the rich, and very importantly, a very strong society that holds everyone to account.
Why did you start researching inequality in the first place?
Well, because you see it everywhere in Mexico, where I grew up. You see it on the streets, you see it in school. You see it in the market, you see it on TV, you see it in the ads, and very worryingly, when I was doing economics in the 90s, my undergrad, it was something that you couldn't really talk about. It was normalized, and fortunately, 20 years later, that has changed. But also, I think the way we were looking at inequality in terms of looking at the whole distribution without understanding what was the political economy driving that inequality, or the political economic consequences of that inequality, was something that was missing. And again, that's something that we've learned a lot over the past couple of decades.
You wrote a very influential report a couple of years ago, together with your colleague Nick Galasso in Washington. Could you tell me how you came up with the indicator that became world famous?
Well, I mean, like one day I was browsing Twitter, and then I came up with this report by Credit Suisse. I was looking at the statistics, and there was it was a global database we never had access to a wealth distribution database. That's very important. That Credit Suisse, with the work of like very respected academics like Tony Shorrocks and Rodrigo Lluveras, undertook this work. But like, I mean, when I was looking at the report, I was browsing the PDF, basically, you know, and I was like saying, well, like, wow, you know, I was astounded by the concentration of wealth. And basically, I mean, I did some number crunching with the database, and then came up with that statistic, you know. So, but basically, like, it was a bit of luck. So I came across that database that was public. And then I just put some effort into understanding what that database was telling, and then finding a clear way of communicating the results.
Can you say something about the report? Remind us.
The report was titled "Working for the Few," and again, like one of the headlines statistics was that the 85 richest people control as much wealth as the bottom half of the population, 3.5 billion people. Those 85 billionaires, like at the time in Oxfam, we said that they could fit in the double-decker bus, the red buses that transport Londoners on a daily basis. Well, basically, you know, like, I mean, what that tells you is, like, wealth, more than income and more than any other resource in the planet, is extremely concentrated in the hands of the few. And we call it working for the few because then we look at how, like, this concentration of wealth actually transforms itself into concentration of power and concentration of decision making and influence, in which your influence as a citizen doesn't come from your vote if you're in a democracy, but it comes from your wealth. And that's you know, like, that's not a very democratic spirit.
Thank you very much, Ricardo.
Thank you, Alice.
Nice to talk to you, as always. I'm Alice Krozer, your host on the Inequalities channel for Futures Frame TV. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.